Morning conference. It's good to see so many of you up and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning. There's a lot that probably aren't, I think, after last night. This morning, we're going to talk about finance. Very important to local government. We've been talking a lot about devolution all week, and connected to devolution, I think, for all of us will be the issues of the pressures of the finance in local government. On the 30th of June, the LGA launched the Local Government and Spending Review, and this included a set of proposals for government to consider as part of its imminent spending review this summer and autumn. It seeks to achieve wide-ranging partnerships between central and local government, which will protect our local services, particularly those of the vulnerable people that we produce services for. The review was based on the LGA's future funding outlook, which highlights a funding gap in local council funding by 2020 of £9.5 billion. Given this reduction in grant, this predicted gap does mean that we and local government are going to have to look hard and deep at further efficiencies, but more importantly, I think, at different ways of delivering those important public services that we're all responsible for in our communities. And I said particularly those, I think, for all of it's those for the most vulnerable in those communities. So this session focuses on what this all means for local government, the challenges we face and the reforms that we need to make in order to make the best use of the pressures that are going to be ahead. And we've done it before, local government. In the last 5 years, we've managed it well, using innovation and creativity, but there has to be more. So today I'm really pleased to welcome 3 speakers for this session. We won't have questions at the end of each speaker. We'll leave that to the end and have a panel session. And the first speaker I'm really pleased to announce is Sharon Taylor, who's leader of Stevenage Borough Council and vice chairman of the LGA. Sharon also holds a senior management post with the Hertfordshire Constabulary, where she's involved on a day-to-day basis in strategic planning, governance and performance issues. And she's 14 years' experience in policing and related community safety matters. It's probably not a surprise that Stevenage has the Beacon Award for preventing crime and disorder and neighbourhood renewal. Sharon is going to present the LGA's perspective and its position in the advance of the budget and the autumn spending review. She'll focus on how we can forge new partnerships between central and local government and to help us to protect vital local services and deliver the government's ambitions. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Dave. We discussed on the way in the danger of historic biographies. I'm afraid I don't any longer work for Hertfordshire Constabulary, but it's true that I did for many years. Good morning, conference. Local government finance sometimes feels like those games you play at children's parties, doesn't it? Musical statues or pass the parcel. It depends on where you are when the music stops briefly, and when you have a small window of opportunity to seize before we're off again. And I think really now is one of those times. The spending review will see councils face further challenging funding reductions and spending pressures over the next few years. And of course, our councils will continue to play their part to balance the nation's books, as we have done over the last 5 years. And as I went round the country last year on the Local Government Innovation Task Force, it was absolutely inspiring to see what's being done in our councils all over the country. Local government received the largest funding reduction of any part of the public sector over the last Parliament, but continued to deliver core services by finding new ways of working. We've proved we can play our part in keeping public finances under control, and our appetite for innovation has been a major contributing factor to the success in tackling cuts. However, we don't underestimate the challenge, and our local government workforce has reduced by over 500,000 between 2010 and 2014. The reduction, including voluntary redundancies and natural wastage, as well as transfers into new and innovative service delivery organisations. Our analysis at the Local Government Association predicts councils face a 12% funding reduction of £3.3 billion in 16-17 and an enormous funding gap of £9.5 billion by 2020. So just briefly, what has this meant to us in Stevenage? We've already taken out the equivalent of our whole net budget. 52% of our grant has been lost, and by the end of the next 3-year period, that will be 68%. We've saved over £750,000 in our shared services with our neighbours in East Herts, and it won't escape your notice that's across a political boundary as well as a geographic one. And we've done a complete efficiency review of the whole council. We've adopted a consultation-led, priority-based budget process. Every year, Stevenage people tell us their priorities, and they have said to us the way that they want us to order the way we deliver our cuts is, first of all, to consider our fees and charges. And if necessary, we have to put them up. If it's unavoidable, then raise our council tax, and only then, and this has very little support, introduce cuts to our services. Unfortunately, to balance our budget, we really do need to do all three of these, although we've been successful in having a 6-year freeze on council tax. We can't afford to make 1-year tactical decisions, so we have to plan over at least a 3-year period, and we're hoping to move to 5 years. On top of government cuts and decisions like cutting council tax support, we get a knock-on effect from cuts in county council funding, like supporting people funding. And with the regeneration issues we face as a first-generation new town, there is also an effect on our capital investment in the infrastructure of the town. We simply cannot find the headroom in our revenue to support borrowing to help us with this. As well as addressing future cuts, which won't deliver all we need, we are developing a targeted commercialisation agenda using the strength of the council brand, a regeneration-led growth agenda, and an expansion of our shared services and partnership working. But we need to drive this further across the country. We need a shared commitment. Our offer to government for the spending review is for that shared commitment between local and central government to allow councils to improve services, drive growth, and save the taxpayer money. We recognise the pain many of our residents and businesses are still feeling, but we're ambitious for our communities, and we want government to share that ambition. Councils have an indispensable role to play in achieving those ambitions and stand ready to work in partnership to deliver on the goals. Without this shared commitment, we just simply cannot achieve this. And we also need a recognition of the inequalities that still exist in our funding system. A radical shift in how public money is raised and spent, combined with proper devolution of decision-making to local areas for infrastructure, transport, housing, skills, social care and health, would allow councils to build new homes, help young people improve their skills, increase employment and support elderly and disabled people to live healthy and independent lives. Let's just look at the fairer funding for adult social care. It needs to be protected in the same way as the NHS. The best way to achieve this is by an expanded Better Care Fund and greater integration of health and social care, joint commissioning supported by a transformation fund. The NHS 5-year forward view supports this, as well as saying it will only be possible for the NHS repeatedly to achieve an extra 2% net efficiency demand saving across its whole funding base if social care services are sustained. This was explicitly recognised by Simon Stevens, the NHS England Chief Executive. He said, when the much-heralded £8 billion NHS funding gap figure that people have inferred from the forward view is talked about, one of the important provisos for that was there was not a further substantial offset in the availability of social care across the country. Fairer funding for local services and the freedom to pay for them will ensure our public services are to survive the next years and will allow councils to tackle the big issues facing their residents and protect services which bind our communities together and protect our most vulnerable. Our latest future funding outlook warns councils in England could face this £3.3 billion reduction in central government funding. Our scope for making greater efficiency savings is getting smaller. 3 in 5 councils don't think they can do any more. Many local authorities are concerned that funding reductions have had a very disproportionate effect on the most deprived authorities and protected groups. And we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. All the noise has been about metro deals and northern powerhouses. In fact, my colleague Tudor Evans in Plymouth talks about feeling like a western outhouse sometimes rather than a northern powerhouse. And we're probably an eastern outhouse in Stevenage. Devolution must extend to all corners of England and not just city region combined authorities under elected mayors. Making decisions at a more local level will bring about huge economic and social benefits, and with non-metropolitan England responsible for 56% of all economic output, the case for wider devolution, to me, is very clear. Meaningful devolution should include greater fiscal autonomy. We need multi-year finance settlements for stability, full retention of our business rates growth, and powers to set rates and discounts. We need the housing borrowing cap lifted to let us get on with building against a guaranteed rental income stream. And we should be free to set council tax in consultation with our community and in line with our democratic mandate. Westminster politicians don't have to have a referendum when they put taxes up, so why should we? Councils are ambitious to increase house building across all tenures and support measures to help people into home ownership. But if we are to deliver the homes and infrastructure we desperately need, we must have a lead role in house building. We could build 500,000 new homes and transform the lives of hundreds of thousands of families if we had greater powers, resources and flexibility. At the moment, the right to buy system only allows councils to replace half, or in my case, even fewer, of the homes we have sold. The government has rightly promised every home sold must be replaced on a one-for-one basis, but since right to buy was introduced, that has never happened, and it must now. We need a business rate system which is buoyant, responds to local needs, promotes growth, and is fit for the 21st century. And then on skills, the current system for getting the unemployed into work needs radical reform. Local authorities, together with their partners, best understand the needs of our residents, our local communities, and how to address their skills needs. With the increased powers and funding, we could halve the number of unemployed young people and reduce long-term unemployment by a third. We must not underestimate the size of the task we have. The messages from government are that the recession is on its way to being dealt with. For us, facing further drastic cuts after the 8th of July, on top of what we've already had, we have the difficult job of explaining to our residents that the worst may be yet to come in terms of the local service cuts right on their doorsteps. But our commitment to our communities, our innovation, and the strength in our local partnerships will, we hope, leave our residents holding the prize when the music stops. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. We now move on to our second speaker, who is Marco Biagio. Marco was appointed in November 2014 in Nicola Sturgeon's first government. He has been involved in many cross-party groups, primarily children and young people, universities and colleges, housing and renewable energy. Born and raised in Dunbartonshire, he joined the SNP in 1998, and in February 2015, Marco was appointed as co-chairman on the Commission on Local Tax Reform. A cross-party group set up in the Scottish Government tasked with examining the alternatives to council tax. Marco is going to present how the Scottish Government has approached funding for local services, including adult social care, and how they are responding to the reductions and the challenges ahead. Marco.
Thank you. And this session as a whole is about fiscal challenges. And I have to say, to begin, like all of the UK, we've had our fiscal challenges in Scotland. And I'd like to take the opportunity to outline the approach we've taken to that, and perhaps implicitly to recommend it as on the basis that we have found it the best way forward ourselves in these very straitened times. But before we look at the light, perhaps let's take a moment to look at the darkness and examine where we are. The landscape for public finances and the economy right now is a dark one. Austerity has failed. At the end of 2014, GDP per capita remained 1.2% below pre-recession levels. Recovery has taken longer than that from the Great Depression. Average full-time wages remain 1.2% below pre-recession, 6% down on pre-recession levels, a pay cut of £2,000. And even by his own target, deficit reduction, the Chancellor is set to have missed by a cumulative £150 billion over the past 6 years. The OECD has found that government spending has fallen twice as fast in the UK as the rest of its members, and it's not just the likely suspects of Krugman and Stiglitz that are sounding alarm bells. There are rumblings coming out, unattributed directly, but nonetheless from the OECD and the IMF. And yet, despite all of this, the preferred approach is to go on. 5 years of austerity, let's have 5 more. IFS in March estimated that cuts in the next 2 years would be twice the size of the worst years of the last Parliament, and we have already, in this year, seen further in-year reductions, £107 million in the case of the Scottish budget. Now, my government last year, it's no secret, held an independence referendum because we wanted, in no small part, because we wanted to go a different way. But the result was the result, and since we're on board, we don't want to go down with the ship. And we'll work with others across the political spectrum to try and change that course to avoid the disaster ahead. In fact, the disaster that we are already amidst. We've got the summer budget next week and the UK spending review in the autumn. And we have very firmly put forward the case for using the spending review to announce plans to boost public capital investment, promoting employment, creating more productive capacity and efficiency in the UK economy in which we can all share and not impact on performance against the fiscal mandate. Infrastructure offers economic opportunities because it doesn't have as high a leakage as revenue spending, and you are left with an asset that continues to contribute, especially that infrastructure delivered by local government at the smaller scale, flood defences, primary school refurbishments, cycle paths and the like, which very often employ smaller, locally based contractors. And like you, we're waiting for the impact of the 2015 spending review because it will affect our budget as much as that of English local government. And that will reach into Scottish local government as well and will define future budgets. But the approach we have taken to local government budgets in Scotland is one of choices. Our auditors are Audit Scotland, the answer to the National Audit Office north of the border. And they reported in March on the comparative situation. They found the following. It is clear that councils in England have faced more severe cuts. Between 2010-11 and 2015-16, the UK government will have reduced its funding to English councils by 37% in real terms. Before I came here, I visited 2 English local authorities who told me a story that accorded with that. Civil servants' best estimate for Scottish reductions over the same period were 7.5% in real terms, broadly in line with the reduction the Scottish government budget had had. The analysis of the different rates of reduction has also been backed by the IFS. And before anybody talks about Barnett formula, yes, there are issues with Scotland. We can debate to the ends of the earth about higher levels of public spending, but proportionate cuts are passed on. If the UK cuts spending in areas devolved to the Scottish Parliament, like transport, policing, health or local government, Scotland gets those cuts too. And since 2010-11, we've had a 9.2% real terms cut overall, 25.3% capital real terms. But we've had a different approach, and it's based on a document which has been the foundation for our work. It was the Commission on the Future Delivery of Public Services, where we commissioned Campbell Christie, a former General Secretary of the Scottish Trade Union Congress, who reported in 2011 and created a consensus in Scottish politics that was and remains right and becomes even more important given where we are going fiscally. The findings were built around 4 principles. Firstly, partnership, developing local partnership and collaboration, bringing the public, the third and private sector partners together with communities to deliver things together. Prevention, reducing future demand by preventing the problems emerging in the first place. Performance, monitoring and reliable improvement methods that are designed, of course, in partnership. And people, unlocking the full creativity and potential of people by empowering them to work together at the front line in innovative ways. And since the publication of Christie, these have remained the basis of our approach, but have been supplemented by a further focus on place and public participation. And participation is different to consultation. Consultation gives the public ideas that are already formed and asks them to comment. Participation brings them in at the start. And this partnership approach is why the Scottish local government situation is holding up and remains broadly 1/3 of our budget in Scotland. We have continued to fund local government on a like-for-like basis, and the finance settlement has increased in cash terms to 10.85 billion. But even before austerity, we had been working in partnership with Scottish councils. It was our choice in good times. One of the very first steps of our government when we came in 2007 was to greatly reduce the number of ring-fenced grants, which stood at 2.7 billion, around about a quarter of total funding in 2007-8, to only 200 million this year. This had the effect of reducing bureaucracy, but allowing councils to plough savings back into services that were their own priorities. And together, we've been able to deliver a fully funded council tax freeze with all councils into 2015-16 and maintain the number of teachers in our schools as well as the teacher-pupil ratio. These are things we have asked for as a quid pro quo on the basis of national priorities. And I'm not going to say that there haven't been disagreements. Any working relationship leads to disagreements, but we have forums and a relationship that allows us to work through them. And I think it is all the more remarkable that while the Scottish National Party has been the government in Holyrood since 2007, at all times since 2007, it has been the Labour Party that has been the largest and strongest voice within the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities, which is the Scottish equivalent of the Local Government Association. And together, we are now taking forward reform agendas based on these principles. Health and social care integration is a major step. £7 to £8 billion of spending committed here to try and tackle issues like delayed discharge and to link up the savings so that instead of one partner bearing the cost and there being perverse incentives from two public agencies that could operate in silos, to link that up and to keep that local link. So instead of a national care service, to have joint boards in each local authority between the NHS and the local authority to deliver health and social care. Police reform that has taken us from 8 regional authorities to 1 central authority, but with 32 local scrutiny committees, 1 in each council. An end to the right to buy that has taken council house building up by almost 1,000 times from before we came in 2007. Even a common recycling charter developed in partnership with local authorities, which offers a possibility for great efficiencies in waste management, participation in city deals, and our own particular flavour of working with the islands areas to find tailored solutions for them. Community empowerment as a major feature of our ongoing work. And of course, the Commission on Local Tax Reform, which I am co-chairing with representatives there of 4 parties. That is what differentiates it from previous attempts to look at council tax reform, which frankly have sat on shelves rather than being enacted. We have civil society around a table, public finance experts, but also representatives of all parties in Scotland, aside from the Conservatives who regretfully declined to participate. It is looking at council tax, potential property tax, local income tax, land value tax to assess and to provide a platform for whatever government comes into the Scottish Parliament in 2016. And ahead, we also want to promote widespread use of participatory budgeting as well. If there is one message about our approach that can be taken, it is the emphasis on partnership and collaboration. And I think that is valid everywhere, not just in Scotland, but beyond. And if there is one crucial factor that we are learning and developing and growing, it is that that partnership doesn't just have to be between the 2 levels of government within Scotland, but also has to be between both of those governments and the people. The people are who we work for and who all public services ultimately have to be designed around the needs of.
Thank you, Marco. And lastly, I'd like to welcome Vicky Price. Vicky is a Greek-born British economist and former joint head of the United Kingdom's Government Economic Service. Currently, I hope this is right, Vicky is on the advisory board of the Official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, where she is regularly involved in meetings regarding the financial and monetary system. She joined the Department of Trade and Industry in August 2002 as the Chief Economic Advisor, the first woman to be appointed to this post. And she is also chairman of the Good Corporation, an organisation promoting ethical business practices. She was joint head of the UK Government Economic Service from 2007 to 2010. Vicky will be focusing on a discussion on how local government can unlock local economic growth and what reforms are needed to do this most effectively. Vicky.
Thank you very much for this introduction. Of course, you heard that I'm Greek-born and Greek, and of course the problems that Greece faces right now are perhaps slightly greater than perhaps what the UK is facing, but I still think that this is a very, very important issue that we're discussing today. So, as we know, the government has already, in its pre-election manifesto, announced its intentions to cut very substantially the deficit, and in fact to move it to surplus by 2018-19, and or at least to balance, and then to bigger surplus in 2019-20. And of course we all know, because it's all been calculated here already, there may be some more details we hear on the July 8th budget, that the falls are going to be quite significant up front. So there's expected to be a front loading of those cuts, which means that really over the next couple of years, things are going to be pretty tough. We may, of course, see a bit of a relaxation afterwards, just as we've seen before, and this is what got us to the last election, and I suspect also the win that the Conservatives managed to get when they were elected recently. So it is all though going to be coming out now in more detail, and the departmental spending cuts, which everyone is waiting for with great anxiety, are going to be known sometime in the autumn. Of course, there are already discussions about the welfare cuts, but in order to achieve some of those expected budget improvements, we are going to see very, very substantial cuts in a number of areas, which of course will have some implications generally for the provision of services throughout the UK. But then, of course, we know that there will be a huge gap in funding for local authorities too, and we've heard some of the figures already. The emphasis will still be on the public sector and any public authority achieving those efficiencies that we've all been talking about. Now, of course, everyone wonders how on earth can one achieve even more efficiencies, but some of the ways that have been already outlined in the review that was published yesterday by the LGA gives us some ideas of how that happens, but of course it has to happen at the local level itself. So how exactly will it be done will be an issue that of course you'll be discussing quite considerably, but I think the important thing is nevertheless for local government to stress the importance that they play in ensuring that some of the aims and targets of the government are in fact met. And I think it's really interesting to perhaps ponder a little bit, the success in some of the areas that the previous coalition was trying to make at least some breakthrough. We do know that the regional and sectoral rebalancing that everyone has been talking about has hardly happened. Again, I think here local government can play a very, very significant role. But it's interesting when you look at data. IPPR, one of the think tanks, has highlighted that over 75% of all infrastructure spend between now and 2020 is planned for London and the South East. And if you look at a McKinsey report that also came out quite recently, it is suggesting that central government, its share of decision-making on public spend, accounts for 72% of all decisions in the UK. And that compares to 32% in France and 19% in Germany. So we are a very, very centralized country. It's not a great surprise to all of you, but it is a very an extraordinary figure in itself. So this is first of all the regional side, and the second one is the sectoral rebalancing that hasn't taken place. We know, of course, there's been a move from manufacturing to services increasingly, and as the economy started to recover, the hope had been the manufacturing would pick up again, and it has been picking up, but its share is hardly rising. The interesting thing about manufacturing is the impact it has on the economy. So any plans that have manufacturing in them have a huge impact on productivity in particular, which is one of the areas where we are lagging behind very substantially right now. The economy is recovering, but productivity is not. What is worth looking at is the importance of manufacturing in terms of the impact it has on loads of other sectors in the region in where it actually produces. And what is calculated is that each pound in manufacturing creates 1.76 pounds of expenditure in the wider economy. And that is one of the highest multipliers in the whole economy. And that is due really to the fact that manufacturing buys research, is involved heavily in development, so it improves innovation, in other words. Of course, the sales attached to it, there's the digital aspect to it, computing, programming, automation, lots of technologies are linked to that. Then, of course, there's the media, distribution, logistics, marketing services, legal, professional, and so on. So if you just think about a region which has manufacturing in it, the impact of it is so much greater than just the direct hiring of people that we normally associate it with. And of course, it tends to be more productive. Manufacturing exports a lot more than many other sectors of the economy, and of course, sectors and companies that export tend to be, in fact, considerably more productive. So this is an area too where proper business plans and development plans in regions can make a very substantial difference. But of course, if they were done in a way that enhanced growth more generally, a number of the targets that the government has been setting will be met considerably more easily. You don't need to cut as much if the economy is recovering more strongly. So there are a number of areas that one can focus on to ensure that this is achieved, and local government has a major role to play, just as we've been hearing, in order to get that to happen. So life will be easier, of course, for everyone. The question, of course, is how, in fact, to achieve it, but there is no doubt that local councils, knowing the area considerably better, and if they have the right powers and the right ability to engage, can make a substantial difference in terms of the need to enhance productivity and entrepreneurship. Because, of course, we all know that all activity is local. Everything that's going on in a locality is known so much better by the local people involved, and not just government, of course, but it's also businesses. The interesting thing is that from the center, where I used to sit for a long time, the statistics that we get are appalling. And of course, for a while, there was an intention to invest much more heavily in regional statistics. That was, of course, in itself cut back. And although there's been some attempt recently to recover a certain amount of that, in reality, we don't know enough. Surveys that can be done jointly with local businesses, understanding a lot better what's going on the ground, can then, of course, tend to help to focus policies, because they are targeted then in the right areas. And it's really interesting when you think the way in which linking all the targets of government and then local government interventions can lead to that higher growth that we were talking about. I already mentioned productivity, right sectors, right developments, ensuring innovation, absolutely key. Skills, which we need, we've just been hearing about, all that, of course. Higher set of skills for the working population, and employability, which is important. So it's linking the skills deals into the city deals and the growth deals. There is quite a lot of money available to do the right thing, but cooperation is in fact the most important one of all. The government right now is talking about the need to cut the welfare bill. Of course, the way you do that, productively is to get people back into employment and into productive employment. Again, local councils can make a very big difference in this. Then reform of public services. Again, we've been hearing an awful lot in that area. It is interesting again to see the extent to which, through proper planning and cooperation, shared services, and thinking of more innovative solutions, you can again get the improvement that is needed. And there are some examples of where active, or at least the calculation is that active involvement by councils can make such a big difference in the various areas of focus of the government. So look at skills, for example. There is an estimation that if you look at the Greater Birmingham area, if you were to reach in Greater Birmingham the national average in the skills level, just to reach the national average because they are below, this would result in a 2.7% increase in productivity and an 867 million annual tax return increase. So those gains, therefore, are really very substantial. Partnership with government and explaining that win-win, which then hopefully leads to the right types of devolutions to take place in order to achieve it, make a substantial difference. It's interesting, though, to think of engaging businesses on the ground, because without that, none of this will happen, because it is businesses that create the wealth. What is it that they want? I mean, businesses are particularly worried about short-termism, lack of policy stability, lengthy planning procedures, I'm sure you all hear this all the time, lack of coordination among local governments, particularly when it comes to site provision, but also in leveraging funds. And there is quite a lot around that one can get to and work jointly to make better bids and then, of course, use the money in the right way. But businesses want this clarity, they want to have access to decision makers, but also what they want to see is that when a policy is being developed, it is based on evidence, so that it has the right results at the end of the day. But of course, the other things they want are the standard ones. A friendly business environment so they can get things done, and they want to see that there is a proper strategy for growth. There's, of course, this big controversy always between city centre versus out-of-town developments, retail developments, and so on, but they want simplification of all this, and they want to be listened to properly. They want any locality to have good linkages all around, and of course to be able to use land properly with sensible brownfield and greenfield policies. And what are the ways that one can achieve it? I already mentioned, if there's to be access, there has to be transparency and openness. The planning regime and procedures have to be sensible. And of course, there has to be proper infrastructure support and leveraging the cash that might be available for it, or having a lot more independence in this area should allow better transport, better housing, and of course, we have a huge housing shortage at present. New funding mechanisms to allow for that is absolutely essential. So, what are the overall conclusions from this? Councils obviously can do an awful lot more, and not just councils or unitary authorities and so on. It is very important, in my view, if there is any realignment to be made for economic growth, that this realignment needs to reflect much more economic realities and economic growth potentials rather than just political and sort of geographical divisions and boundaries that have existed for some time in the past. So it needs to be rethought and needs to be done properly. So the focus has to be on collaboration, to have a sort of ecosystem that allows for the growth to happen. We see already some very good examples in terms of universities with the science parks and of course the enterprise zones that are being developed around them, which is absolutely essential. And also, of course, think about apprenticeships. What is happening to our FE colleges, which of course are being starved of funds? A lot of it is going into the higher education, but if we are to achieve the targets that the government has set, then there needs to be a rethink of exactly how FE colleges in the neighbourhood are in fact funded and developed. The links to businesses, incredibly important in that respect. And of course, there are a number of other areas that are already, of course, being developed in terms of how you have better government, more efficient, in terms of outsourcing non-core services, which can lead, there are very good examples, of course, of where they can in fact come back themselves, the outsourced ones, to achieving profits and returns to the councils that are moving into this. Thinking about funding, of course, there's the perennial issue. How does one get pension funds to be much more involved in local development and regional development in various areas? There are some issues in terms of cooperation, in particular with the LEPs. The interesting thing for me, I was working for the government when we had the regional development agencies, and then, of course, I was working for the government when we got rid of them. I think the LEPs, the LEPs, have developed certainly their governance structures, and a number of them are already becoming active. Some of the money is finally coming back, but I think they need to also work much more closely together. Having so many LEPs which don't necessarily work together is in itself bad news, and of course they understand that, and they are getting together to create much more effective voices and use the funding that's coming to them in a considerably better way. But there is one very important part at the end that I'd like to leave you with. When I did work for what was the Department of Trade and Industry and then became BIS, we were worried about the RDA's technical capability. Some of them were excellent in terms of what they were trying to do, but what was missing mostly was a real understanding of economics. I am, of course, slightly biased. There was, I think, only one, if I remember, which was the East of England one, linked to Cambridge, that had a proper economics capability, where there were people there doing their cost benefits, the value for money calculations, and therefore prioritizing the right way. Of course, the LEPs have developed themselves economic advisory groups, and I was on one actually, I'm afraid the Manchester one, for a while. And then the local authorities, of course, very hugely, and I've worked with loads myself in my past, in terms of their capability. Because if you are to convince not just your fellow people who work in the council, but also the politicians, the local politicians, of a need to move in a certain way or another way, then you do need that economic capability and the proper work to be done. And if you are to convince the government, the central government, which, as I said before, is still so centralized, then again, this is of paramount importance. And what has happened in some areas, like Manchester, is that they have invested in think tanks that produce that for them. It doesn't have to be inside the local government itself, but it can be provided externally. But if it is, it has to be listened to, and it has to be communicated to everybody involved, including people who live in that locality, so that one can move forward in a way that everyone buys into and which is based on proper evidence. And with that, I think, the chances of local governments being considerably more autonomous and getting that extra power from government, because they can prove that they can, in fact, contribute to achieving the targets the central government is setting itself, that would be that much easier if that were to be the case. Anyway, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Vicky, and thank all three of you for such, I think, interesting but for me thought-provoking speeches. I think we've got a couple of minutes, yes, for one or two questions, if they can be brief, because I know we're running out of time. Is there anybody that would like to make any comments on any of that or ask any questions? Is there anybody at all? I can't see any hands anywhere. There's a gentleman in the front row. Thank you.
Stan Collins, South Lakeland District Council. Just commenting on what Vicky was saying about the lack of understanding of economics. Isn't one of the big problems in government generally that there is a lack of understanding of statistics? And both politicians and the officers and civil servants use statistics in a way which shows that they haven't the foggiest idea what they're doing. And really, we all need a bit of training to use statistics effectively and accurately, rather than just as, what is it now they say about the drunken man uses statistics, using statistics as a drunken man uses a lamppost for for support and not for illumination.
Thank you. Vicky?
Can I answer that? I mean, you are, of course, absolutely right. Now, it's not the economists who use statistics wrongly. It is that everyone who wants to fight for a particular cause of their own can selectively use statistics and then use them to prove what it is that they want to prove. And of course, that's what we used to call policy-based evidence. In other words, we want to do something, go and find us the statistics to prove it. Of course, without looking at the right correlations or looking at the rest of the picture. And what I'm afraid the beleaguered economists in the civil service do is try and fight against that and say, actually, you need to look at the bigger picture. But I think you've also got a point, though, too, that people, certainly in government, tend to be quite suspicious of what happens at the local level. But often it is because the information isn't coming back in the right way. And as I said before, there is a lot of lack of knowledge, even at the local level, of what's going on around you, and one needs to supplement it by a lot of local information. And getting that information in the right way, that people can receive it at the centre, is actually very, very, very important. And it would change the view of what can and can't be done by, letting, if you like, delegating an awful lot of stuff that would have been happening in the centre to the locality if one understands the situation considerably better. So I think you've absolutely got a point in that.
Sharon?
I think you're absolutely right about statistics, and I think the points that Vicky made about evidence-based policy making are absolutely key to this debate. And I've had so many discussions around the housing revenue account borrowing cap, which it indicates very clearly to me that that there is a shortage of understanding about what that is and what we're asking for, because it isn't treated the same way in this country as it is anywhere else in Europe, and it is borrowing against a guaranteed rental income stream. So there is no reason not to do it and to take it out of the PSBR. But successive discussions with successive chancellors and shadow chancellors we haven't achieved this yet. We need to keep on at it and using the evidence that we have that says this will work and it will help us to regenerate the housing economy in our areas.
Thanks, Sharon. There is a lady over here, very quickly, and I think this has to be the last one. I think we're running against time. So one very quick question.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Nicola Beach, Chief Executive of Braintree District Council. Working with other Essex authorities and businesses and so on developing Essex devolution proposals. Vicky, I was very interested in your comment about sort of their economic competence and how you build that in, and having a think tank, and that's something we've been discussing at high level, rather than having a sort of one-off economic study, having something that's more dynamic and fluid with expertise that's not necessarily embedded but sort of challenging and independent. Just welcome any further comments on that. Thank you.
It's an excellent idea. It has to go that way. But of course, I mean, the interesting thing is to borrow, like in everything else, is to borrow from experience elsewhere and see what works best. And of course, it will vary from area to area because there may well be some capabilities nearby. There could be a university, there could be sort of think tanks around, there could be people who can actually provide that service. In other places, it may be more difficult to do so. So in a way, one can even cooperate across. So learn from best practice and cooperate. But I think this is definitely the way to go.
Thank you very much, and I'm very sorry, I think we've run out of time, but can I thank again the panel, and I think the message I get from this is that local government, it's your responsibility, you can have a key role in the economic well-being of this country, and by making this country economically more viable, then public services will be protected into the future. So the challenge is for us, I think, but thank you all very, very much for your input. Thank you. I've been asked to say, could delegates please stay in their seats for the next session? It is Harriet Harman who's probably waiting in the wings, and if you could stay in your seats, we'll move straight on into that session. Thank you very much.